Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ketodontist podcast. This is your host, Dr. Matt. For those of you new to the show, I welcome you. Here we are talking about everything through my experiences, not only as a dentist, but also a health coach, on my own weight loss journey, utilizing a paleo, keto, now even somewhat carnivore-ish diet. We have, today's going to be a solo cast, but we've had many great people on the show as well. So if you go back and listen to some previous interviews as well, just really good content in there. And really it's a lot of the stuff that I wish I would have had when I started down this path 10, 20 years ago. So anyways, like I said, welcome back. Today is going to be an interesting episode in the fact that I'm actually going to be talking about COVID-19 for the very first time. And the reason I haven't been talking about it to this point is because I do not consider myself an expert or qualified to talk about anything pandemic related, honestly. However, it has started to intertwine with the dental realm, and there's been some reports come out lately that have been talking about COVID-19 and its impact on dental health and vice versa, and that I do feel very qualified to talk about that. And so we'll be talking about that today, and then if time allows, might be talking about, I mentioned carnivore earlier, some concerns that I'm starting to see within the carnivore community, kind of an implosion, if you will, and so I want to unpack that a little bit here in a little bit. So if you find value from today's show, please like, subscribe, tell other people, share it. That's how we continue to grow. I try to get these podcasts out when I can, but I'm a full-time family doctor. I am a family man, and I'm also working on myself. I'm down over 100 pounds right now, but I still have some ways to go. So this is not a full-time job for me. I don't make money selling endorsements or supplements and stuff, so I just try to get this out when I can. So please, I need you to help me promote the show. This is where we unpack a lot of the BS floating around there in this kind of quote-unquote hashtag influencer space. So getting to the nuts and bolts of today's issue. So the first article I want to talk about is talking about the implications of of gum disease and its implications on COVID-19. So this was actually reported in a dental journal, and there is an article that's coming out. And there's an article that I want to read to you here. So emerging research has suggested that there's a connection between gum disease and SARS-CoV-2, according to a new report, The Mouth COVID Connection. The study, which has been accepted for publication for the October 2020 issue of the Journal of the California Dental Association, found that hospitalized corona patients with prior underlying gum disease are more likely to suffer respiratory failure. The MCC study found a link between the bacteria produced by swollen, red, bleeding gums and bone loss, symptoms of chronic periodontitis, and COVID-19. Researchers found that patients with high levels of IL-6, interleukin-6, it's a harmful protein produced by gum disease, were at significantly greater risk of suffering life-threatening respiratory problems. A similar study in Germany tested COVID-19 patients for the interleukin-6 protein while they were hospitalized and determined that these patients were in critical condition and needed a ventilator to breathe. The study was conducted over a 3-month period by Dr. Shervin Molayem, a dental surgeon based in Los Angeles and founder of the UCLA Dental Research Journal, and Dr. Carla Pontus, a scientist and healthcare researcher in South Africa. Drs. Molayem and Pontus' studies suggest that patients with bad gums are at risk of generating harmful levels of interleukin-6 that spread to their lungs. When combined with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it can trigger a life-threatening respiratory crisis. Quote, gum disease has been linked to other breathing ailments, including pneumonia and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. So we weren't surprised to find a link to respiratory problems with COVID-19, Dr. Mulayem said. What shocked us was the discovery of the protein's devastating, life-threatening impact to patients once they're hospitalized. One tiny inflammatory protein robbed them of their ability to breathe, end quote. Doctors Mulayem and Pontus determined that hospitalized COVID-19 patients with gum disease, interleukin-6 levels above 80 picograms per milliliter are 22 times more likely to suffer from acute respiratory problems and placed on a ventilator compared to patients with interleukin-6 levels below 80 picograms per milliliter. The MCC researchers urge anyone concerned they have gingivitis or more serious gum disease to schedule a dental appointment as soon as possible. An analysis of 153,000 Americans who have died since the first cases were reported highlights the role researchers believe gum disease has played and continues to play in the pandemic's rising death toll. Elderly patients, particularly those with immunocompromising underlying conditions such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease, are more likely to succumb to life-threatening COVID-19 emergencies, including respiratory failure. MCC researchers say the same demographic is also likely to suffer chronic gum disease than any other age or demographic. Researchers hope these findings compel nursing homes to implement a dental screening protocol that will help determine which patients are more vulnerable to gum disease and elevated interleukin-6 protein levels. They are also urging hospitals and emergency room doctors who admit COVID patients to take a moment and check for gum disease, a disease that may prompt them to direct their staff to be more vigilant over the patient's breathing. Researchers say periodontal disease is the most underdiagnosed ailment in dentistry, and they urge those who think they may have periodontitis to get treatment as soon as possible. As the death toll keeps climbing, the CDC now predicts the virus will be among the leading cause of death in the United States, just behind heart disease and cancer, said Dr. Mulayem. Quote, now that we've confirmed periodontitis makes it even deadlier, if you are worried that you may have gum disease, your next trip to the dentist may actually save your life, end quote. So I agree with that to an extent, but at the same time, there's some hyperbole in there that I want to impact a little bit. Now, they're linking periodontal disease because of raised interleukin-6. Now, this is not the first article to report this tie between elevated interleukin-6 levels and worse COVID outcomes. Cardiac Rhythm News reported a link on that back in April of this year. And then just 2 days ago, I'm recording this on the 12th, August 12th, so just 2 days ago, Medical News Today had a report that I'm going to read about, just summarize interleukin-6 levels. And the title says, Severe COVID-19, interleukin-6 inhibitors may be most effective. An observational study found that people with COVID-19 who received these drugs earlier fared better than those who received them after they became critically ill. The study also suggests that the inhibitors may be more effective than remdesivir or dexamethasone. So here's the thing with that. That's why periodontal disease helps contribute, and I've talked about this before, it helps contribute to our inflammatory burden, okay? And so I don't think it's going to be a smoking gun for worse outcome with COVID-19. Can it be a contributor? Yes. But if you take an overly healthy person that has mild to moderate periodontitis and they get COVID, are they going to die? Probably not. Now, as the first article explained, The people most affected by this are the elderly and the immunocompromised. So it goes with everything. Yes, gum disease is very prevalent. And here's the thing, though. Gum disease, severe gum disease, I see that in all adult, from 18 to 80. I see it. And it can be very, very locally produced, but that is more from oral hygiene neglect and very, very poor diet. Okay? But I'm not as sold on the idea that an otherwise healthy person, because they have gum disease, is going to have overly exacerbated COVID, or complications from COVID. I'm not sold on that idea. Now, I'm willing to change my mind as research comes out and as more data is provided. But as of right now, I'm not going to jump to that conclusion. Periodontal disease does have a two-way street with the rest of the body, okay? People with diabetes and periodontal disease have worse outcomes for both. Uncontrolled diabetics that have periodontal disease have worse periodontal disease. And their resolvement of their periodontal disease oftentimes doesn't improve until we get their diabetes under control. And vice versa. People with diabetes sometimes have trouble reaching more stable blood sugar until they get their periodontal disease resolved. So it's a two-way street. And I see that happening with this inflammatory burden and periodontal disease. But I know my profession, and there are going to be certain people that are going to take this and really run the ball, saying, this 5 millimeter pocket with some bleeding could kill you because of the COVID. And I am going to vehemently disagree with that. Okay? So, yes, periodontal disease is an infection. It needs to be treated. Bleeding gums act like an open window for that bacteria or virus or whatever to then enter the bloodstream. Okay? And so, because that in and of itself warrants treatment. But that being said, I don't really want to make grandiose claims just yet, like I know some people in my profession are going to do. Okay? So, if you have inflammation, if you have gum disease, what should you do? Well, I talk about diet a lot more than a lot of my peers. I have areas, I don't have tons of tartar buildup. I don't have infection per se. But if I let grains into my diet, or I go lax on my diet, I feel inflamed, like my nose gets congested, all that stuff, I will actually develop gingivitis even though my home care has not changed. Just from dietary measures, all of a sudden I will get bleeding spots in my gums. And then and I've tested this, it's N of 1, it's anecdotal, blah, 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 but I've tested it multiple times that if changing nothing but my diet, I remove all grains, all sugars, all that stuff, the bleeding goes away. And I hear that time and time again from people, but nobody is really talking about it. So my first intervention is always going to be go on, an elimination diet. Look to see what could possibly be causing inflammation. For some people, it's grains. For some people, it's dairy. It's sugars, all that stuff. No sugar, no grains, kind of a Whole30 approach is a great way to get started. And then some people, they need to go even lower carb, kind of paleo keto. That's where I live. Some people need to go like full on carnivore. It's whatever. And this isn't meant to be construed as medical advice, but this is how I would suggest somebody, urge somebody look into doing this. Because our diet and inflammation are very, very closely linked. And then that, as far as this gum disease process, that is very linked with the inflammatory burden of our body as well. So there's the inflammatory burden, but then there's also localized infection. Now, if you have tartar buildup, also known as calculus, that does need to be removed because that does act like a harbor for bacteria. And then, my favorite protocol right now is something that I've learned recently, and that is when we do our periodontal therapies, we're starting to treat at that time with beta iodine and then also diluted bleach solution. And it's funny because that diluted bleach solution, which is 1 teaspoon of bleach per 8 ounces of water. And it has to be made fresh every time. You can't make a big batch and just use it. It's got to be made fresh every time. But there's some really, really good data, and I'll go into this more in a future show. I think that would be a great episode, is using this 1 teaspoon of bleach per 8 ounces of water. That concentration has actually been shown to be very safe and very effective as an antibacterial and antiviral rinse for promoting gum health and maintenance. So that's something that we've started providing to our patients in the treatment of periodontal disease. Now, we're very new at that, but I've been spending a lot of time, definitely over quarantine, diving into all the stuff that I've been wanting to learn. And that's one of the things that I've come across recently. And it's very, very exciting to see. Very low cost, but very effective way to do things. So, like I said, if you have gum disease, get it treated. But I am not going to state that if you have gum disease and you get the Rona that you're going to die. I know people are going to do that. And I don't think it's there yet. Because, let's talk about interleukin-6 for a minute, So interleukin-6 is interesting in the fact that it's a pro-inflammatory cytokine, but it's also an anti-inflammatory myokine, like how it works on the muscles. Myokine, muscle. And so it's really, it's really interesting. Like osteoblasts, say for example, osteoblasts secrete IL-6 to stimulate osteoclast formation. That makes that has a process in our office when we do orthodontics, because you're dealing with myoblast, myoclast activity in bone remodeling. So that is a very, very normal adaptive response, right? Well, when is that out of balance and that's a problem? Osteoporosis. So it's interleukin-6, I don't want to make it seem like the devil, because it's not, okay? It's something that is normal to have. It's just what happens is when it's out of balance, out of whack, because there are inherent underlying issues going on, that's when it becomes a problem. And so, interleukin-6 is released after a workout, after strength training, because it's a myokine. It has anti-inflammatory functions as a myokine. So obviously, it's secreted into the bloodstream in response to muscle contractions. So obviously, that is a good thing to have interleukin-6 for, right? So interleukin-6 itself is not the bad guy, okay? It's just the dysregulation, the imbalance that is leading to abnormally high levels and chronically. That is the problem. And so instead of focusing on interleukin-6, let's focus on the underlying problems that's causing it to be out of whack in the first place. And that is ultimately metabolic health, right? There's with interleukin-6, it's kind of like two sides of the coin, On one side, the positive aspects of interleukin-6 is it promotes macrophage activation. It has atheroprotective actions. It can be insulin sensitizing. And then, like I said, as a myokine is being upregulated after exercise. Negative aspects of interleukin-6, it can be pro-inflammatory for certain cell types. It can be pro-atherogenic. It can promote insulin resistance. And then adipocytes, fat cells, release interleukin-6. That's why obesity is so closely tied to inflammation, right? And so it's not interleukin-6 itself, it's not IL-6 itself, it's what's causing it to be out of balance in the first place. And that is really what we need to focus on. And unfortunately, that's what's lost in modern medicine. You know, they're trying just like they're trying to promote COVID vaccinations, even though we don't have a vaccine for the common cold or, you know, the flu. I mean, we have flu vaccines, but that's just the strain that we think is going to be popular, that, you know, most prevalent that year. It's not like you have to get it every year. It's not like you get it once and you're done, right? So we need to focus on metabolic health. That's really the focus on. But everybody just wants to get these topical, superficial, one-off solutions, and that's not going to be the case. So anyways, I beat that dead horse enough. Now I want to talk about the next Corona dental related thing, and that is a post that I saw in the New York Post, and then I've seen it pop up elsewhere as well. And it's called "Mask Mouth is a seriously stinky side effect of wearing masks." And I'll share my opinion at the end of this. So, reading the article, some bad breath can't be covered up. Now that dentists have reopened their doors, they're having patients show up with a nasty set of symptoms, which the doctors have dubbed mask mouth. The new oral hygiene issue caused by, you guessed it, wearing a mask all the time to prevent the spread of the coronavirus is leading to all kinds of dental diseases like decaying teeth, receding gum lines, and seriously sour breath. Quote, "We're seeing inflammation in people's gums that have been healthy forever and cavities in people who have never had them before," end quote, says Dr. Rob Ramondi, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a dentist and co-founder of One Manhattan Dental. Quote, "About 50% of our patients are being impacted by this, so we decided to name it mask mouth after meth mouth," end quote. The term meth mouth is widely used by dentists to describe the dental problems that arise among methamphetamine users. Addicts often end up with cracked, black and brown stained teeth because the stimulant causes sugar cravings, teeth grinding, and jaw clenching. They also have neglect their oral hygiene. While mask mouth isn't quite as obvious, if left untreated, the result could be equally harmful. That's a stretch. Quote, "Gum disease or periodontal disease, it will eventually lead to strokes and increased risk of heart attacks," end quote, says Dr. Mark Sclafani, another co-founder of One Manhattan Dental. He says the stinky syndrome is triggered by face coverings since wearing a mask increases dryness of the mouth and a buildup of bad bacteria. Quote, "People tend to breathe through their mouth instead of their nose while wearing a mask," end quote, says Sclafani. The mouth breathing is causing the dry mouth, which leads to decrease in saliva, and saliva is what fights the bacteria and cleanses your teeth. He adds that saliva is also what neutralizes acid in the mouth and helps prevent tooth decay and gum disease. End quote. People's tendency to drink less water while masked up, as well as consume more coffee and alcohol during lockdown, have also added to the widespread dehydration he's seeing. On the bright side, dentists say they're packing in breath-conscious patients who might otherwise neglect their dental health during the pandemic. Quote, patients are coming into us like, wow, my breath really smells. I need a cleaning. But when you smell that bad breath, you either already have periodontal disease or you have a lot of bacteria sitting on your tongue because of dry mouth, end quote. While masks are not negotiable given the times, Sclafani says that there are things wearers can do to avoid the grossest side effects. Drink more water, cut down on caffeine, snag a humidifier to help moisten the air, use an alcohol-free mouthwash, scrape your tongue, and don't smoke. And if all else fails, quote, just breathe through your nose, end quote. Yeah, you think? Yeah, save the very best for last. Here's the thing, masks aren't the issue, it's mouth breathing is the freaking issue. And mouth breathing, unfortunately, is very, very common. But it's at one of those times where we say, don't mistake normal for common. Just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal, and that's the case here. Okay? We're a nation of mouth breathers, and it could be because of our crowded arches, it could be because of our diet causing stuffed up noses, deviated septums, what the heck ever. It's so multifactorial. We'll get into that in another episode. And we've talked about it a bit already. But wearing masks isn't the problem. I'm not pro-mask, I'm not anti-mask. I'm pretty centrist as far as masks go. But the problem is breathing through our nose. And he kind of hinted on it a little bit, with this quarantine increase of coffee and alcohol. It's not just breathing through our mask. Honestly, I don't know. There's no real data to show that wearing a mask while mouth breathing it causes more dryness than mouth breathing in general. I really don't know if we can make that claim. I've never seen any data on that, and I've not noticed that myself, and I'm not. Granted, I work in a rural, low-income area, so I see periodontal disease and decay all day, every day. So I'm not seeing an uptick like what they're talking about in Manhattan. I really don't know if wearing a mask while mouth breathing has a more drying effect than mouth breathing in general, or maybe the fact that people are more prone to mouth breathe while wearing a mask, and if they weren't wearing a mask, maybe they'd nasal breathe more. Maybe. I'm not, that could be. I'm not sold on that either. Honestly, I think it's probably the same stuff that's, contributing to the COVID-15. The joke of 15 pounds people gain over quarantine. I think it's the fact that their mental health is suffering and their diet is suffering and they can't go to the gym and they're suffering from depression, and so they're drinking and snacking and using stimulants and all that stuff, smoking more. That's probably more what's going on than quote-unquote mask mouth. I just think that this is a term that dentists are trying to use to get in the news and get some publicity. Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical on the whole mask mouth thing. But at the end of the day, like they said at the very end line, just breathe through your nose. You think? If you're having problems breathing through your nose while wearing a mask, get a nasal strip. Those Breathe Right strips are wonderful. I wear them all day because I am I am a chronic mouth breather that I have had to retrain myself to be a nasal breather. But because of my anatomy, the constrictions of my nose, my high vaulted palate, my crowded narrow arches, I still want to mouth breathe, and so I've had to train myself to nose breathe. But also, I use nasal dilators. I use Breathe Right strips, or I use what's called a mute, which is a little nasal dilator. You can get it. It looks like a nose ring almost, and it has these little rings that help hold open the nostrils. And you can get off of Amazon, and those are what I use. And in a way, wearing masks all day kind of helps because it gives me an excuse to wear these nasal dilators all day, and people don't even realize it. So, If you're having issues breathing through your nose, I'd recommend doing that. Breathe Right strips, those are cheap and easy to get. The mutes are kind of nice. Just pick one and stick with it, and just breathe through your nose. And breathe through your nose, and don't have a crappy diet, and that's it. So it all goes back to the stuff that this show is predicated upon, and that is returning to nature, returning to real normal, not what's common. So that's enough about mask mouth. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about is concerns that I have in the carnivore community that I'm seeing. Basically Instagram and Twitter where internet was broken, carnivore style between Paul Saladino and Sean Baker over Paul's honey consumption, because is honey carnivore? And I still don't know the full context of it. Paul, I think, goes into in-depth about his honey consumption, that he started feeling better when he started adding more carbohydrates back into his diet. He still promotes a nose-to-tail carnivore approach, meat-based diet. But he said that he started feeling better when he started incorporating some carbohydrate loads. And he does so in the form of honey. And then people the carnivore zealots just kind of flipped out about it, and, is honey's not carnivore, blah, 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 you're not a true carnivore. And that's kind of led to this back and forth spats between Sean Baker and Paul, and I respect both. I have not met Paul personally. I've met Sean a few times and hung out with him a few times, and he's a nice guy and I get along with him. Paul, I haven't met him personally. I would say my personal nutrition views are probably more in line with Paul, and the fact that if somebody's going to go carnivore, I would promote more of a nose-to-tail style of carnivore. I think it's more nutrient-dense, and I also think it's just better environmentally, and it's more respectful to the animal. It's more ethical and humane to, if we're going to take a life and consume an animal, we should try to get as much out of that as possible. I think that pays the most respect to that life versus just focusing on muscle meats, just eating ribeyes or one cut of meat. I think we should, be good stewards and utilize that that whole animal to its fullest potential. That's why we just picked up a half of beef, so we have a freezer full of meat, and I take all of the organs that people don't want. I take the brain, I take the liver, I take the heart, I take the tongue, all this stuff, because I want to maximize the life that animal had. And I think that's just the most ethical. And so, the carnivore world's kind of imploding, and you have these two quote-unquote influencers in that space going at it, and really it's causing a rift and a divide in the community, to the point that people are going to start falling out. And the thing is, though, this is nothing new. It was bound to happen. It happened in paleo, it happened in keto, it's happened in low carb. Everybody's so freaking divisive, and it's my way or the highway, that they just cannot. We see that in every aspect of life, guys. I'm sorry, but it's stupid. We see it in politics, we see it in the media. It's just, we can't have nuanced discussions anymore. I mean, you have one side, Paul's ripped, and if he feels good eating honey, then let the man eat honey. He's obviously healthy. He's got good stuff going on. I think he's using a continuous glucose monitor, CGM, and it doesn't seem to be throwing his blood sugar out of whack. So who cares? Let the man eat some honey. Sean obviously is doing pretty well with his things. some of his blood work is a little wonky that I don't quite like. His A1C is pretty elevated, even though he's ripped to shreds, which is a good indicator of health, and he's strong and all that stuff. I don't know if maybe he has some metabolic issues, but if he feels good and he's performing what he wants to, then who cares? Let people live their lives as long as they're showing that they're healthy. Granted, you can have abs and not necessarily be metabolically healthy and all that stuff. I'm not trying to say that, looks are the only indicator for health, but it's multifactorial like everything. But if somebody is feeling good and looking good and their blood work's looking good and their performance is good, let's let them keep doing their thing and living their lives, instead of having all of this infighting. It's just stupid. So that's my thoughts on it. Take it or leave it. I hope you like today's show, guys. If you do like today's show, please subscribe. Leave a review. A written review would be fantastic. I would love a written review. In fact, tell you what, it is August 12th as of this recording. It'll go out later this week. I will give to September 15th. Folks that get in a review by September 15th, I will have a drawing and I will read that in our September episodes, and I will get your address and stuff, and I'll send you some swag. How about that? So, you guys take care. Have a great day. See you next time. In the meantime, eat, move, smile, and I'll talk to you later.